Chapter 15, Seven Tales. Hokage Tower. Hearing the council complaining about nothing at all was slowly driving him mad. He couldn't understand why he was even here, why was he needed. Sarutobi thought they wanted to hurt Naruto, but he knew too trustworthy Anbu was watching him. He knew they wouldn't let him out of sight, and he was safe. He pinched the bridge on his nose, his eyes roamed around the council room, and stopped at his old friend, Danzo. They both were old shinobi, good at hiding their emotions, but Sarutobi could tell that something was up. Just the way the edge of his lips was slightly upwards worried him. He remembered that Naruto told him about the emotionless Anbu spying on him when the first attack happened. Hiruzen hoped his eyes were playing tricks with him, but he couldn't help but have a bad feeling on his gut that something was up with this council meeting. Kakashi was away in an S-rank mission, leaving Bear and Cat to protect Naruto if needed. Sarutobi had received a letter from Jiraiya informing him that he would arrive soon. He hoped he had answers for Naruto's chakra. He had read a few scrolls and books and found no answers, not good enough answers. He remembered and heard from Tobirama-sensei that nature itself looked to react from Hashirama's mood and his chakra. That was proof enough for Sarutobi to believe that Naruto had Senju blood, but the question remained, how, and Hiruzen found no answers. He glanced at the photo of Minato hanging on the wall. The old Hokage wondered if his successor had any secrets that he didn't want anyone else to know. Thinking about Minato made him remember how Naruto felt if he was happy here. The old Hokage was no fool, and he knew his surrogate grandson wasn't happy. No, he needs a family, but who can give him that? Minato, what would you think about the village you gave your life for? What would you feel about the way they treat your son? Sarutobi asked himself and decided to ignore it. For now, he put that question at the back of his head and focused on the pointless council. Hokage-sama? One of the civil council members asked, looking at the Hokage. Sarutobi narrowed his eyes at his tone, leaking his ki, showing who was in charge here. The man looked to get the message as he put his hand on his chest and tried to catch his breath. His color was gone from his face. White as milk, and his hands shaking. Yes, Hokage replied quietly, his hands clenched together in front of him. Another man close to him suddenly stood up. What he wanted to ask was, what will we do with the demon? The man asked with a disgraceful tone. The old Hokage closed his eyes, his hands clenched tightly, and his shadow looked to grow behind him. His eyes couldn't be seen. Next time you refer to Naruto like that, will be the last time you talk, Hokage promised. The air became cold for everyone in the room. Even Danzo was sweating slightly from his forehead. The man fell back on his seat, his face white as snow, his mouth hanging open. The old Hokage glanced at everyone around the council room to see if anyone wanted to sleep. The silence grew in the room. Sarutobi moved away from his pipe and decided to move to the next topic. Anything else? He asked, wanting to end this pointless meeting. A few moments of silence followed, and even the clan heads started looking at the civil council. One of them moved his elbow to one close to him. The man looked to wake up and opened his mouth to talk when everyone suddenly felt a surge of power, and it came from outside. Every ninja in the room stood up, looking at the windows when the power stopped. It disappeared as fast as it appeared despite feeling it only for a short moment. The old Hokage recognized Naruto's chakra. Without a second thought, he moved his fingers, and 3 Anbu showed up. With me, he ordered and left through the window in a hurry. Please be safe, Naruto, the old Hokage thought. Jumping from roof to roof, they reached a hallway that was close to Naruto's apartment. Sarutobi felt his heart beating in his throat. The smell of blood was in the air. The old Hokage knew that smell way too well. The thought that the smell came from Naruto frightened him. They were jumping down. His eye was met with a view that came out from a war battle. Blood was dropping in the ground from the corpses that were torn apart and hanging in the air. The blood was streaming down the halfway like a small lake. Sarutobi saw wood piercing through their flesh and bones. Guts falling on the floor, making a terrifying sound. Snow was red, Some of the villagers had their faces split open, from wood piercing them behind their heads and splitting their faces, skin hanging from limbs to limbs. Would look to have grown inside some of them and come out from different parts of their bodies. Sarutobi looked at some of them that looked like branches of a tree coming out of their bodies. All their eyes showed fear and terror, their mouth left open, screaming until death embraced them. Sarutobi closed his eyes, snow falling on his hat. He opened them again and ignored the carnage in front of him. He didn't count them, but he knew they were at least around 30 bodies lying around. Slowly moving to the end of the hallway, he was met with even brutal sight. Naruto lying on the ground, covered everywhere in blood. Without thinking twice, he rushed at the young boy, touching his neck, and looking at his chest still moving up and down made him sigh in relief. The old Hokage moved him in his hands, his little body like a glass that could easily break. Guilty and sadness filled his heart. He had failed Minato, he had failed Jiraiya, the second and first Hokage, but most importantly, he failed Naruto. Anbu Hiruzen screamed, and they kneeled in front of him. He turned to them, still holding the little boy in his hands. Send him to hospital. If they give you crap, arrest them and send them to Yoabiki, he ordered. Quickly grabbing Naruto, they moved away, leaving him alone in his guilty. The old Hokage looked down at the snow covered in blood, a part of a body fell in the ground, but Sarutobi didn't bother to look who it was. His eyes slowly looked up, looking at the trees that had grown. They made the symbol of a spiral, the bodies still hanging, like tree decorations. He took a deep breath and decided to deal with whoever had organized this. Naruto. He felt his body floating in the space, his whole body feeling numb. Water covered his body lying on his back on the cold floor. The water almost reached his nose. His eyes opened beneath the water. Usually, he felt at peace around nature, but now, he felt cold. The water felt cold on his skin and clothes. The air itself felt cold. Naruto could feel Kurama's gaze looking down at him, and he could feel his sadness and worries. Why am I still here? To suffer? Naruto asked himself. He tried very hard to close his eyes and tell himself that it was all a dream, but he could still feel the pain and hear their screams. Closing his eyes, visions of their blood falling in the frozen ground like a waterfall was in front of him. Naruto wanted to believe all this was a dream, and like any other dream, he would eventually wake up. Tusan. Is this the village you protected? This village you gave your life for? Did you? No. This. Naruto asked himself, his blue eyes gone. Instead, they were red like blood on my hands. Naruto, Kurama called him, concerned about his well-being. Naruto slowly raised his body, his eyes looking at the giant fox behind the cage. The trees weren't green anymore, their leaves turned brown. He was falling softly on the floor covered in water. Naruto went to his friend. Why do people do this to me? Naruto asked, his voice tiny and breaking. Tears on his eyes. Kurama wasn't sure how to answer. Looking at Naruto, he leaned his head closer to the bars. People in the village feel grief, and they want to blame someone for their loved ones. I'm not around to blame, but they know. I'm sealed inside you, so they blame you. Humans always want to blame someone. Forgiveness and blaming yourself for your problems are not attributed that humans are known for. Kurama replied, sure that Naruto wouldn't understand it. He was still only a little boy. Naruto heard his answer and kept quiet, his eyes looking at Kurama's red eyes. After a few moments of silence, he stood up on his legs and walked towards his friend. The water felt heavy on his legs, and then he stood in front of the cage. He raised his hands, not shaking despite being close to the Kyuubi, the strongest demon in the world. To Naruto, he was a friend, and his hand softly touched his fur. Thank you for being here, Kurama, Naruto replied with a smile on his face. Kurama grinned and felt the positive feeling of Naruto slowly coming back, and the trees looked to be returned to their old self. Always Naruto, Kurama replied happily, and he could swear he saw his father standing behind Naruto with a smile on his face. His red hair reminded him of the time when things weren't as bad. He reminded Kurama of Roku as well. Are you the one? After 3 days hospital. Lying on the hospital bed was Naruto, his red hair covering most of his face. The old Hokage was sitting close to him. His eyes looked down at the little boy with spiky red hair. Sarutobi knew Jiraiya would give him hell for what happened to Naruto, and he couldn't really blame him. No, he blamed himself. The two ANBUs that were supposed to protect Naruto had reported that a fight had started close to them. They had left to deal with it. When they had returned, finding the Hokage looking at what was left of the mob that had attacked Naruto. Sarutobi hadn't told anyone about Naruto using wood style, and they didn't need to know. Returning to the council meeting, he had ordered the whole civil council to be sent to Ibiki for questioning, much to the surprise of everyone else in the council. Shikaku was quick to put 2 and 2 together, and had immediately asked if Naruto was alright. It broke his heart to say that Naruto had been beaten by a group of idiots that couldn't tell the difference between water and glass that holds the water. The wood in the hallway had been quickly burned to disappear any evidence that wood style was used. The bodies had been buried despite deserving to be left to rot. Hokage knew Kakashi would as well return soon from his mission, and he didn't know how to tell him that a mob had beaten up Naruto. I have failed. Suddenly the window was opened. The old Hokage didn't bother to see who it was. The air suddenly felt much colder, and a shadow stood close to the old Hokage, looking at the little boy lying on the floor. Who did this? Jiraiya shouted, slamming his hand on the table close to his sensei. The old Hokage turned and glared at his student. Jiraiya always looked happy. It was hard to piss him off, but now he looked more pissed than when Orochimaru had left the village. Sarutobi put the finger on his lips to tell him to be quiet, and he moved his head in a gesture to follow him. He followed and reached the Hokage office. Reaching it, he put a silent seal and told his ANBU to leave them alone. He turned to his only student, who still worked for the village. His body was leaning against the wall waiting for him to explain. 3 days ago, a mob attacked Naruto. I was busy in a damn meeting, and the ANBUs that were supposed to protect him were dealing with a fight that had occurred between civil and shinobis. When I reached Naruto, everyone from the mob was dead. Death by wood, Hiruzen explained and waited for the furious shouts to come, but instead, he was met with silence. Jiraiya just stood there and looked to be thinking about what he had just said. After a minute of absolute silence, he moved away from the wall and turned to look at his old sensei. I'm taking Naruto with me to train then, Jiraiya stated, with a tone that he was saying a simple truth that would happen no matter if he liked it or not. Hiruzen wasn't surprised to hear that. He grabbed his pipe and smoked from it, trying to ease the pain on his head. He glanced at Minato's picture before looking at Jiraiya again. Removing the pipe from his mouth, he cleared his throat to speak. You said it was dangerous, old Hokage reminded him. That would be, but where I'm taking him, no one would be there to cause him to harm, or even spy on him. Old Hokage's eyes widened, understanding where he meant. Pinching the bridge on his nose. How long? Hiruzen asked, wanting to know how long Naruto would be away from the village. 4 years. What about the academy? Hiruzen asked, thinking that Naruto could spend more time with his friends once he started the academy. Once he returns, you can put him in the class he was supposed to be if he never left, Jiraiya stated. Closing his eyes, he remembered Naruto lying with blood covering his whole body. Is granted. Ashira Uzumaki. The sound of the sword hitting wood could be heard throughout the forest. She moved her hands again and slashed the tree in half. The tree fell to the ground. The tree was still young but still was an achievement. Sweat covered her face, breathing heavily, trying to catch her breath. She decided to lay down on the grass and rest, and her purple eyes looked downwards at the seal on her wrist. The seal was a red color and had appeared when her mother had died. Her thoughts went to her mother and father. She knew what had happened to her father, and her mother was buried close to a tree. Her red hair reached to her shoulders, her small sword tightened behind her back. A symbol of phoenix was on the pommel of the blade, a yellow bird spreading his wings, beneath surrounded by flames. It had been months, Asha wasn't sure how many since the hidden village of Taki had found her. The town was full of waterfalls, even the air itself looked to have tiny drops of water in the air. The leader of the group was Lord Shibuki. A young man with black eyes and long, dark brown hair going just behind his neck wore gray pants and a green shirt. The village was built around a lake, and the water was very relaxing. Some village women would sometimes wash in a hidden lake away from their eyes. Asha hasn't bathed in any lake yet, but that wasn't important to her right now. The leader had told her she could stay here as long as she wished. Ashira had eagerly accepted. She lived in a small house in the village, with only 2 rooms. The restroom and bedroom were in the same room. The toilet was in the second room. It wasn't the best house, but Asha didn't complain. She made sure to visit her mother's grave every day, tell her how she had been. The ANBU that followed had disappeared. Their bodies were burned when they died, leaving no evidence of which village they were. Asha didn't know, but she promised herself to take revenge on whoever ruined her life and killed her family. Asha had started studying shinobi stuff the 3rd day she had arrived, mostly on seals. Sadly, Taki had no seal master, and the last one had died 2 years ago. Walking back to the center of the village, Asha was heading to her home and glancing at the seal on her wrist. The seal looked like a spiral, with an empty circle in the center, with a small flaming circle surrounding the seal. She didn't know what the seal meant. Deciding to ignore it and think later about it, she heard a sound coming from a store. "Get out and stay out. I've told you before, you're driving the customers away." A shout was heard from a nearby store. A girl ran away from the store. She had green hair. Asha looked around her, noticing the disgusted look of everyone around. She wondered what their problem was. She had seen the girl before but didn't have a chance to talk to her, deciding to follow her. She ran after her. Soon she reached a big tree that was in the center of the village. The tree looked almost 3 times the size of a typical tree. The branches looked big enough to be a tree on itself. Much to her surprise, insects were flying around the leaves. But her eyes quickly stopped to a tree house. A smile slowly spread on her face, and the house looked exactly like the tree house she had before. Hell was even more significant than hers. Asha decided to look at it more closely. She walked up to the treehouse to find the girl lying on the floor of the house. Her hands clenched together in front of her chest, her eyes looking at something in her hands. Deciding to reveal herself, she cleared her throat, making the girl stand up immediately and turn to her. She had spiky mint green hair, tanned skin, and wore a short white shirt that showed her midriff with a white miniskirt with bandages on her legs and under her shirt, and white armlets, wearing blue shinobi sandals. Asha could tell the girl was scared of her, her eyes looking at her terrified. "Don't worry, and I won't hurt you. I'm a friend," Asha said, trying to ease the tension between them. Her eyes widened at her words. A smile spread on her face. "Friend?" she asked with a small voice. Asha nodded her head. "Yes, and my name is Ashira. You can call me Asha." Databane, she introduced herself with an open hand in front of her chest. "My name is Fo, friend Ashira." Ashira is 5 years old. First pre-
Alright, guys, that's gonna be part. Oh my god, I have the worst memory ever, I swear. 12 of What If Naruto Was the Red Flash. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, like, subscribe, comment, tell me what you loved, tell me what you hated. Um, yeah, thank you guys for all the support on, What If Naruto Was Adopted by Kakashi Part 7, and, yeah, so thank you guys for all the support. There is not a like goal, and I will see you guys at the next part. Bye.